She said it on the second morning over the supply inventory without looking up from the page. "Don't call me ma'am." He had said it the way working men said it in this country, as punctuation, as the social distance that kept arrangements from becoming complicated. He had said it 3 times the previous day, and she had let each one go, and on the second morning she decided she was not going to let the 4th one go, because ma'am was the word for a woman at a remove, a woman being managed with courtesy, and she had not come to the Reardon spread to be managed with courtesy. She had come to do a job, and the job required her to be in the actual room rather than at the polite edge of it. He looked up from the fence post he was notching at the end of the work table. His name was Gant Reardon, and he was 37, and he had the stillness of a man who had been alone long enough that silence had become his first language, and what he did with the silence now was use it to look at her the way he looked at everything, fully and without the social softening that most people use to make looking less direct. "What should I call you?" She had not thought that far. She had only thought as far as the objection. Her name. The words came out almost as a question, which was not what she had intended. "Wren?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he went back to the fence post, and she went back to the supply inventory, and neither of them said anything else, and the morning continued, and he did not call her anything at all. He did not call her Wren either, which she had also not expected, but which she found, considering it that evening in her room, was the more interesting choice. Ma'am was a refusal to see her, specifically. Wren would have been a kind of claim. What he had chosen instead was the unnamed space between those 2 options, and the unnamed space was, she discovered over the days that followed, its own kind of attention. Her name was Wren Aldous, and she had come to the Reardon spread in the 3rd week of September on the back of a position offered through the Callaway Employment Exchange, and the position was housekeeper, and the spread was 40 miles north of the last town with anything to recommend it. And she had taken it because the exchange had sent her 3 positions in the previous 4 months, and this was the only one that had not tried to tell her, in the careful language of a contract, what kind of woman she should be while she was in it. "The Reardon position," said housekeeper. "Fair wage. No other requirements stated." She had read the absence of requirements and understood it as a kind of honesty. She was 31, and she had been a housekeeper for 6 years, and she had learned in those 6 years the particular taxonomy of the positions available to a woman with no family and no prospects and considerable competence, which was a combination the world found simultaneously useful and inconvenient. The useful part was that she could run a household better than most people who had grown up in one. The inconvenient part was that she had opinions about how it should be run, and was not shy about the opinions which had ended 2 of her previous positions and been the basis for a polite separation from a 3rd. She was not difficult. She was specific. The distinction was meaningful to her, and had been meaningless to several employers. Her father had been a county assessor for 20 years, and she had grown up in his office the way some children grow up in kitchens, with the smell of documents and the sound of figures being read aloud. And she had learned, before she was 12, to read a set of accounts the way other children learn to read a story, for what it was actually saying rather than what it appeared to be saying. Her father had died when she was 22 and left her the office furniture and a set of habits that made her exactly as useful as she was, and exactly as unconventional, and she had taken the unconventional along with the useful because they were the same thing and could not be separated. The previous 3 positions had been households that needed management and did not want opinion. The Reardon position turned out to need both. She found this out over the first week, during which she reorganized the kitchen, renegotiated the supply order with the Callaway Mercantile on the grounds that the current order was running $30 above what the equivalent goods cost at the mill directly, and identified a drainage problem in the south pasture that she had noticed from the operating accounts, which showed 3 years of abnormally low winter weight tallies on the south herd that had no other plausible explanation. She told Gant about each of these things at the kitchen table in the evenings, plainly and with the figures, and he listened to each one with the full attention of a man who was receiving information he intended to use, and he said little in response, and what little he said was to the point. He did not tell her the kitchen was fine as it was, or the supply order was someone else's concern, or the drainage problem was a matter for the foreman. He said the supply figures were correct, and she should send the revised order. He said the drainage had been flagged 2 seasons ago, and he hadn't had someone available to put together a cost analysis, and he said it looking at her in a way that made the meaning clear without stating it. She put together the cost analysis by Thursday. She had expected somewhere in the first week the moment when her specificity would become inconvenient. The moment when someone would say that was more than was asked for, or more than was needed, or more than was appropriate from a housekeeper. The moment had not come. It had not come in the second week either, when she reorganized the accounts into a consolidated format and showed him the improvement in legibility. Or in the third week when she found the land claim in the deed box and brought it to the kitchen table without first considering whether it was her place to bring it. Each time she said a specific thing she had thought about saying, he received it with the same direct attention. Each time she waited for the conversation to be redirected toward the simpler version of her, it was not redirected. She had not known until it stopped happening how much of her attention had always gone toward managing that moment. The absence of the management was a kind of space she had not had in a position before, and she was learning incrementally what to do in a space that did not require her to be smaller than she was. This is Dusty Vales, where stories like hers live. Women who arrived with specific opinions and found the one man who thought specific was the right word for them too. Men who chose the unnamed space because it was more honest than the easy word. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then back to the ranch. She learned the shape of him the way she learned all things she needed to understand. From the evidence outward. He rose before 5 and was in the barn before she had the stove lit. And he came in for breakfast at first light and ate with the focused efficiency of a man who regarded food as fuel and had not had a reason to regard it otherwise. After the first week, he began to slow down at meals. Not dramatically, but perceptibly in the way a man slows down at a table when the table has become a place worth being rather than a station to pass through. He did not say the food was good. He ate more of it, which was the honest version of the same statement. He had 2 hands, a laconic older man named Foss and a younger one called Derry, who had the nervous energy of a person who had not yet found the pace that suited him. Foss had been on the Reardon spread for 11 years and had the particular authority of someone who has been in a place long enough that his opinion of it constitutes institutional memory. He looked at Wren on the first day with the assessment of a man who has seen several housekeepers come and go and is reserving judgment. And he gave his judgment at the end of the second week by coming to the kitchen door and saying the south pasture drainage analysis she had done was the clearest piece of ranch accounting he had seen. And then, going back to his work without waiting for a response, she received it as the highest form of compliment, which was one given without expecting acknowledgement. She did not examine what was happening in the evenings. She was careful about that, in the way she was careful about things she was not ready to name, because naming things changed them. And what was happening in the evenings at the kitchen table was something she needed to let develop at its own pace, rather than the pace she would impose on it by deciding what it was. What was happening was this. After supper, when the hands had gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was quiet, Gant stayed at the table. He did not always stay long. Sometimes he stayed for 1 cup of coffee and sometimes for 2, and once for the better part of the evening while a storm came in off the north, and the house creaked around them, and she read and he went over the accounts she had reorganized in the second week, and neither of them said much, and neither of them needed to. What accumulated between 2 people who are in the same room without performing being in the same room is a form of knowledge that is different from and more reliable than the knowledge you get from conversations about the weather and the cattle price. She knew by the 4th week that he had learned the particular sound her reading made, the quality of her attention, when she was in a book she had no objection to, versus a book she was tolerating. She knew this because she had seen him look up once when the quality changed, checking without asking. She knew the specific quality of his silence when he was working through a problem in the accounts as opposed to simply reading, which was a slightly different stillness, a stillness with more direction in it. She did not know. She knew these things consciously. She knew them the way you know things that have been accumulating in the part of the mind that does not announce itself. What she also knew, and also did not examine directly, was that the unnamed space between Mam and Ren had become a thing with texture and weight. It was not the blankness of a man who had not decided what to call her. It was the specific attention of a man who was paying very close attention to the particular person in front of him and was not going to reduce that person to a convenient category. She had spent 6 years being reduced to a convenient category. The not reducing was so unusual that she did not immediately know what to do with it, and so she did what she always did with things she did not know what to do with, which was to keep working and let the understanding come in its own time. In the 3rd week, she found the land claim in the deed box. In the 4th week, she found the discrepancy in the surveys. These were the practical events that moved the story forward, but the thing that was actually happening ran alongside them like a second current in the same water, quiet and with its own direction. And by the end of the 4th week, she knew the direction and was choosing not to name it, which was different from not knowing it. And the difference was the whole of what had changed since the 2nd morning and the supply inventory, and the word she had refused. "Tell me when," she said. "Don't call me ma'am," and he called her nothing instead. Did you understand immediately that the nothing was not absence, that it was the most careful kind of attention? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone. Now, back to the ranch. The trouble came from Callaway, which was where trouble always came from in this country, because Callaway was the nearest town, and the nearest town was where the things that wanted to complicate a life came from. His name was Arden Bowl, and he had a land claim that abutted the Reardon Range on the east side, a claim that had been documented and contested and redocumented across 3 years of county filings that Wren found in the deed box in the 3rd week when she was looking for the irrigation easement she needed to understand the drainage analysis. The claim was for a strip of the east pasture that Bowl said the original Reardon deed had miscalculated, and the claim had been filed twice and rejected twice on the grounds of insufficient documentation, and now it had been filed a 3rd time with a new survey that Bowl had commissioned from a surveyor in Cheyenne. And the 3rd filing was sitting in the county clerk's office in Callaway and had a response deadline of the 30th of October, which was 19 days away when Wren found it. She went to the kitchen table that evening with the deed box and the county filing, and both surveys, and she spread them flat and read through all of it in the careful cover-to-cover way her father had taught her, the old survey and the new survey and the deed and the filing and the county's previous responses. And she found the thing that the new survey was trying to hide, which was that the Cheyenne surveyor had used a different datum point than the original survey, and the different datum point was the source of the discrepancy. And if you corrected for it, the discrepancy vanished and the claim failed on its own mathematics. Gant came in from the evening check and stopped in the kitchen doorway at the spread of documents on the table. She looked up from the survey pages. The East Pasture land claim. Your deed is sound. The new survey used a different datum point than the original, and the difference accounts for the entire discrepancy Bowl is asserting. She put her finger on the relevant line of each document in turn. If you can get a surveyor to correct for the datum and produce a comparison the county clerk can read, the filing fails. The deadline is the 30th. He came to the table and stood looking at the documents. Then he sat down and looked at them more carefully, and she watched him read. And she had not been wrong in her reading of the spread. She was rarely wrong in her reading of a spread, and she knew by the way his expression changed at the relevant line that he was arriving at the same conclusion she had. How long would the corrected survey take? She had already looked into this. A surveyor in Callaway can turn a datum correction in 5 days if you go in person and explain the deadline. I can write out the technical explanation of the discrepancy tonight if that would help you explain it to him. He looked at her. She had been at the ranch 4 weeks. She had reorganized the kitchen and renegotiated the supply order and produced a drainage cost analysis and found an unresolved land claim in the deed box and was now offering to write the technical explanation that would allow him to defend his east pasture to a county clerk. Go to Callaway tomorrow? She set the pen down. I'll have the letter ready before you leave. He looked at the survey for another moment. Then he said he would go at first light, and she said she would have the letter, and he went to the basin to wash before supper, and she picked up the pen. She had the letter ready by 9 that evening, 2 pages. The discrepancy explained in language a surveyor in Callaway would understand, and in language the county clerk would be able to follow with the relevant measurements from both surveys laid out in parallel, so the correction was visually obvious rather than requiring calculation. She left it on the table with the surveys organized beside it in the order Gant would need to present them, and she went to bed. He was gone when she came down in the morning. The letter was gone too. The surveys were gone. Foss came in for breakfast and looked at the cleared table and said Gant had left before 4. She said she knew he had a deadline, and Foss said he did, and then Foss said, in the way of a man who does not usually say things that are not strictly operational, that the letter she had written was the clearest explanation of a survey discrepancy he had seen, and he had seen a few, and she said thank you, and Foss said you're welcome, and they had their coffee. Gant came back on the 3rd day with a corrected survey and a receipt from the county clerk's office confirming the counter-filing had been accepted. He set both on the kitchen table at supper and said the surveyor had been able to follow her letter without further explanation, and the clerk had been able to follow the corrected survey without further explanation, and Bull's claim was going to fail at the 3rd review. The same way it had failed at the first 2. She said she was glad, and she meant it as exactly what it was, which was the satisfaction of a problem correctly solved. He looked at her across the table for a moment with the expression she had come to know from the evenings, the one that was not quite readable because it was assembled from components she did not yet have the full vocabulary for. Then he said there was something he had been thinking about saying for several days, and he was going to say it now. She waited. The position was listed as housekeeper. He kept his voice even and direct, the way he kept it in the evenings. The work you have been doing for the past 4 weeks is not housekeeper's work, or it is not only that. He paused. I have been calling you nothing because I did not know what to call you, and the reason I did not know was that the word for what you are in this house does not fit any of the available categories. He held her gaze. I would like to find the word. I do not think I should find it. Unilaterally. I think it requires your participation. She looked at the corrected survey on the table and the county clerk's receipt and the drainage analysis on the shelf where she had put it in the 3rd week and the account books organized in the order that had taken a week to build and that now ran the place with something approaching clarity. And she looked at the man across the table who had called her nothing for 4 weeks because the available words were all wrong and he had not been willing to use a wrong word. She did not know what word she was either. She knew what she was not, which was a housekeeper in the category that word usually implied, and she knew what she was in practice, which was a person who had put her specific intelligence into this specific place and found that the place received it without argument and gave back something she had not expected, which was the daily experience of being exactly as specific as she was and having that be the right amount of specific rather than too much. I don't know the word either. She said it plainly. I know that I came here planning to do a job and stay the season and leave, and I know that I am not planning that anymore, and I know that the not planning it anymore is not because of the work, though the work is right. She held his gaze. It is because of the evenings at this table, and because you chose nothing over the wrong word, and because nothing turned out to be more than I expected. He was very still. She looked at the survey on the table. There is a word. Her voice was quieter than the rest of the conversation. That becomes the right word if you want it to. He looked at her. He looked at the kitchen, and the accounts on the shelf, and the drainage analysis, and the letter that had gone to Callaway and come back as a receipt, and he looked at the table they had been sharing in the evenings for 4 weeks without naming what the sharing was. I want it. He said it plainly. The way he said things he meant all the way through. The trouble came the following week, which was its timing's only courtesy. Arden Bull came to the ranch in person on a Wednesday, which was the kind of thing a man does when he has lost a legal filing 3 times and has decided that the legal mechanism is not going to serve him and he should try a different mechanism, which, in Bull's case, was his physical presence and the implied weight of it in a yard where there were 2 people rather than 1. He was a large man, and he used his size the way some men do, as a form of argument conducted before any words were exchanged. He found Gant in the yard and ran on the porch, and he addressed Gant with the manner of a man who intends the third party to overhear, which was that the Reardon deed was going to face a fourth challenge, that he had found a different surveyor willing to look at the datum question differently, and that the courts in this territory moved slowly, and an ongoing legal dispute was an encumbrance on a property title, and encumbered titles were difficult to sell, or refinance, or use as collateral, and that there were ways this could be resolved more simply than through the courts if Gant was willing to have a practical conversation about the east pasture. Gant said nothing. He had the specific quality of nothing that Wren had come to understand meant he was waiting to see what the full shape of a thing was before he responded to any part of it. She came down from the porch. "Mr. Bull?" Her voice was even. She had the filing statutes in her head from the week's reading, organized in the order she would need them. The fourth filing will fail for the same reason the third did, because the datum correction is documented and on record at the county clerk's office, and any subsequent survey that contradicts it will need to account for that documentation in its methodology. Bull looked at her with the particular attention of a man recalibrating who he is dealing with. She kept going because she had prepared this, and the preparation was meant to be used. Any surveyor you commission will be working against an existing corrected record, which means the burden of proof shifts to the challenger and the standard of evidence required is higher on a fourth filing than it was on a third. She held his gaze. The county clerk has discretion to refuse a filing that does not materially add to the existing record, and a survey that does not address the datum issue materially will not add to the existing record. She had read this in the county filing statute, and she had read it carefully, and it was true. The practical conversation you are proposing would require Mr. Reardon to concede something a court will not require him to concede. That is not a practical conversation. That is a different kind of pressure applied through a different mechanism, and it carries its own legal implications if it can be construed as harassment of an established title holder. Bull's face did the thing faces do when a conversation has gone in a direction the person did not anticipate, and they are deciding how to respond to the new direction. He looked at Gant. Gant looked at Bull with the steady, unhurried quality he brought to everything and said, "She manages the accounts and the legal correspondence on this property." He said it the way he said things, plainly, without addition. And then he said the other thing. The thing neither of them had said to each other privately. Said now in a yard in front of a man who had come to apply pressure, said not as a social arrangement or legal status, but as the plainest available description of what was true. The thing he said because the moment required the word and the word was true, and he had never been a man who withheld a true thing because the sequence was not yet perfect. "She's my wife." 3 words, said the way a man states a fact he has already proven to himself, not a question, not a proposal. A fact placed in the yard in front of Arden Bull, who understood immediately that the weight of it was not just social or legal, but the weight of a man who has decided something completely and is not available for reconsideration. Bull looked at them for a moment with the expression of a man who came to apply pressure, and has found that the thing he came to press on is made of a different material than he expected. He had 3 failed filings and a yard full of wrong mathematics, and a woman who had cited the county filing statute at him from memory. And the combination was not favorable. He left without having accomplished the thing he came to accomplish, and the yard went quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when the pressure that has been coming has finally arrived and been insufficient. The yard was quiet in the way it goes quiet when a thing that has been coming has arrived and passed. Wren stood in it for a moment with the October light on the east pasture that was still theirs and would continue to be, and then she looked at Gant. He looked at her. There was nothing evasive in his expression. There was never anything evasive in his expression. I said it before we had settled it between us. His voice held the acknowledgement of a man who knows the order in which things should happen and is aware that this one happened out of order. That was not the right sequence. No. She looked at the house and the accounts and the kitchen and the table in the evenings and the unnamed space they had been living in for 4 weeks. But it was true. He looked at her steadily. It was true. She looked at the east pasture in the morning and the word that had been said in the yard in front of a man who had come to make things difficult. And she thought about the taxonomy of available words and about the unnamed space between ma'am and Ren that had turned out to be not an absence, but a form of presence. And she thought about 4 weeks of evenings at a kitchen table and the particular quality of a man who chose nothing over the wrong word and had finally found in a yard in October, under a little pressure, the right one. She thought about what she wanted, directly and without management. It was the right word. It was the right word used in the right yard, about the right person, even if the sequence had been off. And the sequence was the only thing that had been off. And sequences could be settled between people, if the people were willing to settle them. We should settle it between us. She said it the way she said things that needed saying plainly and in the right register, in the right order. He nodded. The matter of the order was acknowledged. She went back up to the porch. He came up the porch steps. They went inside, and the kitchen was there the way it had been every morning for 4 weeks, and the accounts were on the shelf, and the drainage analysis was filed where she had filed it, and the evening was coming in from the east, and they sat at the kitchen table. She put the corrected survey on the table between them. It had been in her hands since the yard, and she set it down as the starting point for the conversation they were going to have in the right order, because the right order began with the document that had required the word, and the word had been said in the yard, and now the word was in the room between them. I said it out there before we had settled it in here. His voice was the same voice as always, direct and without embellishment. That was the wrong sequence. She looked at the survey. The sequence was wrong. She paused. The word was right. He looked at her. She looked at him. They were both people who did not use words carelessly, and the word he had used in the yard had been used with full understanding of what it meant. And they both understood that, and the understanding was the thing that made the settling easy. What they settled, at the kitchen table, in the October evening, was that the word that had been said in the yard was the word for what had been true for some time, and that the sometime could be counted from approximately the second week, when the evenings at the table had become something neither of them had named because neither of them had a category. That fit, and that the absence of a category had been its own form of recognition, because a man who has decided to choose nothing over the wrong word is a man who takes words seriously, and a woman who notices the quality of a man's silence is a woman who has been paying the kind of attention that has a direction to it. They did not say much of this directly. They said some of it. The rest of it was in the kitchen, the way it had been in the kitchen for 4 weeks, in the quality of the shared space and the particular silence of two people who are in the same room, without performing being in the same room, and the kitchen held it the way a good kitchen holds everything, with warmth and without requiring it to be announced. When the coffee was finished, he said her name, the first time he had said it in 4 weeks. Ren? He said it the way he said the things. He meant completely, quietly, and without ornament, as a word he had been holding and had now decided to use. She looked at him across the table. I'm not going anywhere. She put the words down the way she put everything down that was true, plainly and in the right register, without softening and without armor. This is where I am. She paused. This is where I chose to be. The choosing matters, she added, because it did, because she was a person who knew the difference between a word given and a word made true every day, and the making true was what she intended. As if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. Gant Reardon. Her name for him, said the way you say a word that has found its place after 4 weeks of the careful nothing that turned out to be the most attentive form of presence she had been given. He nodded once. The matter was closed in the way the good things close, not with an ending, but with a beginning, which was the next morning and the one after it, and all the mornings that followed, in a kitchen that had always been the right kitchen for the specific person who was in it. She had told him not to call her ma'am on the second morning over the supply inventory, and he had called her nothing instead, and the nothing had lasted 4 weeks, and what it had been was the most careful form of attention she had ever been given. The attention of a man who would not use the wrong word even when the wrong word would have been convenient. Pooh sat at her kitchen table in the evenings because the kitchen table was where she was, and that was the truest reason a man can have for being anywhere. And in the 5th week, in a yard in October, With a man who had come to make things difficult and had failed because she had read the filing statutes, the word had arrived before the sequence was perfect, the way the best words sometimes arrive, and it had been right, and she had known it was right the moment she heard it. And they had gone inside and confirmed it in the right order, and the wrong sequence had become the right one, because the word itself had been correct from the beginning. She had said, "Don't call me ma'am," on the second morning, and he had called her nothing until the day he called her wife, and the nothing had not been absence but presence of the most careful kind. And the wife had not been a social convenience, but a true thing said in a yard under a little pressure by a man who had never been willing to say anything less than the true thing. And that was who he was, and she was the person who had seen it, and the rest of it was hers, and the kitchen was hers, and the word had been found. And she was not going anywhere at all. The east pasture was theirs. The evening was coming in the way it had come every evening for 4 weeks, across the same land, through the same kitchen window, and the table was there, and they were both at it, and the unnamed space had a name now, and the name was right, and it always had been, and neither of them needed to say anything further about that, because it was already completely true.